Welcome to Starbound. My name's the Voice Ogre, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new stories of Sunspire Academy, which I happen to do, and Freyrin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The alarm was not a scream. It was a scalpel. A cutting tone designed to slice through complacency without inducing panic. It was a sound that belonged on this bridge, a place of cool tones and controlled information. It was the first thing Commander Kenji Ito had noticed about the TCS Midas that he genuinely liked. It was professional. "Forced FTL disengagement, Captain!" Ito's voice was tight, a compressed spring in the otherwise zen-like calm of the bridge. "We're being interdicted. Dropping out now." The ship did not shudder so much as it settled, like a great beast lowering itself into a crouch. The star streaks on the main view screen snapped back into sharp, glittering points of light. Blackness. And then, not blackness. "Multiple contacts," announced Ensign Davies from the tactical station, her voice a model of forced calm. A steady rhythm in this sudden, discordant composition. "Vok Marauder class. I count 6 of them. Bearing 090. Range 5,000 kilometers and closing fast." 5,000 kilometers was knife fight range in space. It was a brawler's distance, a sucker punch in the dark. The Vok were not known for their subtlety. The ships resolved on the screen. They were an offense to orbital mechanics and aesthetics alike. Asymmetrical, brutish things that looked less like they were constructed and more like they were brutally hewn from slag heaps. Blocks of ultra-dense, slate-gray alloy were bolted together with a kind of aggressive functionality, bristling with oversized weapon emplacements that seemed to snarl at the surrounding dark. They were the architectural equivalent of a bloody, clenched fist. And in the center of their ugly, encircling cordon, the TCS Midas sat like a jewel. Captain Evelyn Reed remained perfectly still in her command chair. She had not moved a muscle, had not flinched at the alarm or sudden, violent proximity of the enemy. Her eyes, a pale, piercing gray, were fixed on the main screen. Her uniform was a crisp Terran Navy charcoal, a stark contrast to the golden gleam of her vessel. She was a veteran of humanity's earlier, uglier conflicts. The ones fought in ships that were, like the Vox, gray and functional, and ultimately inadequate. She had seen good people die in those coffins. "They're boxing us in, Captain," Ito stated, the obvious hanging in the air like static. He ran a hand over his meticulously neat black hair. "Their interdiction field is strong. We're not going anywhere." "I'm aware, Commander." Reed's voice was low and carried a strange timbre, as if being played through a perfectly tuned instrument. It was the keynote of the entire bridge. "They've been shadowing us since we left the Eridani shipyards. I was wondering when they'd get tired of playing peekaboo." Ito stared at her. "You knew?" "I suspected. The Vok are nothing if not predictable. They see something shiny, they want to smash it and take the pieces." She finally shifted, her posture radiating an unnerving, absolute confidence. "Let's see what the big man has to say." "Ensign, are they hailing us?" "No, Captain," Davies replied. They're forcing a channel." "Of course they are," Reed murmured, almost to herself. "Rudeness is a cornerstone of their culture." The main view screen flickered, replaced by a face that only a deeply disturbed mother could love. It was a nightmare of dark green and brown chitin, a broad, flat visage with a series of vertically oriented mouthparts that clicked and ground together as he spoke. 2 pairs of small black eyes, stacked one on top of the other, glittered with a predatory arrogance. Behind him, The Vok Bridge was a vision of industrial hell. A cacophony of shrieking alarms, gouts of steam hissing from exposed pipes, and crew members bellowing at each other over the din. The lighting was a furious, flickering red, a visual representation of the dissonance and chaos that governed their philosophy. This was Vok Marauder Captain Krelg. His voice boomed from the speakers, a gravelly avalanche of sound.
Human vessel, you have blundered into our territory, flying a ship that is an insult to the very fabric of reality.
His mouthparts clacked for emphasis, a sound like stones being smashed together. On the Midas Bridge, Dr. Ben Carter, the lead civilian engineer for the Aegis project, let out a low whistle. He was leaning against a console, his rumpled lab coat a splash of organized chaos against the bridge's clear lines. Charming fellow. Really knows how to break the ice.
Quiet, Ben,
Ito hissed, not taking his eyes off the screen. Krelg was warming to his subject. He was not threatening so much as he was lecturing, a furious professor of applied brutality.
We have watched you, humans. We have seen you scratch at the edges of the galaxy with your flimsy ships and your even flimsier ideas. You value decoration, frivolity. You plate your ship in a soft, useless metal, a simplistic marker of wealth. It is a lie, a shiny, decadent lie, hiding the weakness within.
He spat a glob of viscous fluid just off screen.
This is a ship for a preening noble, not a warrior. It is a symbol of your corruption, your softness. It is an offense to the honesty of the empty dark. The universe demands strength, density, truth. Your gaudy trinket is a lie that must be purged.
He leaned closer, his multiple eyes seeming to bore through the screen.
Surrender now. My hull breakers will take great pleasure in peeling the tiny lie from your frame. We will render you down to your honest components. Yes, your surrender will be your only act of truth today.
A horrific grinding noise filled the air, a sound that took a moment to identify as laughter. Carter fidgeted, a manic energy thrumming through him. He really doesn't like the paint job, Captain. Reed's gaze was unwavering. She let Krelg's rock grinder laughter echo for a moment, letting the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it soak into the bridge. Then, with a flick of her finger on her chair's control panel, she silenced him. Krelg's face vanished, replaced by the silent, imposing view of his ugly flotilla. Every eye on the Midas Bridge was on Captain Reed. Ito's knuckles were white when he gripped his console. He believed in his captain. He truly did. But the Vok were savages with a proven track record. And the Midas was an untested theory wrapped in a riddle. Reed keyed the comms again, this time to the Vok flagship, not waiting for them to accept. A small window appeared on the view screen, showing Krelg's face, his mouthparts still twitching with amusement. He was about to speak again, to continue his tirade, but Reed cut him off. Her reply was simple. It was cold. It was perfect. You'll find our hull to be more than decorative. She terminated the channel. Aboard the Vok flagship, the Bone Grinder, the sudden silence from the human ship was more insulting than any shouted defiance. Krelg stared at the blank screen where the human captain's impassive face had been. She had hung up on him. Him. His amusement curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. It was unused to such defiance, Prey was supposed to grovel. Prey was supposed to beg. It was not supposed to be dismissive.
Insolent whelps!
He bellowed, the sound shaking the deck plates of his own bridge. Steam vented from a nearby conduit, hissing in agreement.
They mock the principle of honest force. They cling to their lies. Crack their dishonest shell. Fire at will!
On the Midas Bridge, Davy's threat board lit up like a nightmare's Christmas tree. Red icons flashed as every Vox ship registered weapon locks. Multiple inbound projectiles, Captain. Davy's voice was a razor's edge. Plasma and kinetic. Impact in 5, 4. Ito braced himself. All hands, brace for impact! 3, 2, 1. Reed did not brace. She leaned forward slightly. Her entire being narrowed to the incoming volley. Show me, she whispered. The storm hit. It was a maelstrom of raw power, a testament to the Vox unsubtle philosophy. Great, molten globs of turquoise plasma, each the size of a shuttlecraft, hurtled toward the Midas. Alongside them, a hail of high-velocity kinetic slugs, massive, depleted uranium penetrators, tore through the back, silent and deadly. It was a barrage designed to punch through shields, melt through armor, reduce any conventional ship to a cloud of superheated vapor and shattered metal. But the TCS Midas was not a conventional ship. The plasma did not explode. It did not splash or detonate in a flash of fury. It flowed. The moment the first bolt touched the ship, something extraordinary happened. The point of contact flashed, not with an explosion, but with an intricate, impossibly fast tracery of golden light. The energy of plasma, denied its explosive release, was instantly channeled across the ship's surface. It was like liquid fire being poured onto a perfect marble sphere, spreading out in a silent, beautiful, and utterly harmless web of lines. The entire ship lit up for a fraction of a second, a filigree of captured lightning, before the energy dissipated into a wavering, ghost-like heat haze that vanished into the black. Then the slugs arrived. There was no clang of metal on metal, no screech of tortured armor, no shudder of kinetic transfer. There was only a strange, resonant thrum. A deep bass note that vibrated through the deck plates. The sound of a god-sized tuning fork being struck. A pure, perfect tone in response to the Vox chaotic noise. The thrum was not just heard, it was felt in their bones. A deep, resonant vibration that made their teeth and sinuses buzz. It was not the jarring shock of an impact, but the clean, pure feeling of immense power being calmly and utterly dismissed. On the view screen, the effect was surreal. The massive uranium slugs, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, simply stopped. They hit the golden hull and flattened, their immense momentum utterly and completely negated. They pancaked against the ship like thrown clay, distorted and twisted, before spinning uselessly away into deep space, shedding the last of their kinetic energy as harmless rotation. One of the ricocheting slugs, a mangled frisbee of hyperdense metal, tumbled end over end across the diameter of the Vox encircling cordon. It struck a smaller escort vessel, the Jawbreaker, on the opposite side of the deadly circle. The Vox, who did not believe in rear-facing shields or body armor on their smaller ships, an aesthetic choice of honest, forward-facing power, were completely exposed. The slug, still possessing a respectable velocity, slammed into the escort's unarmored engine block. The result was a brief, silent flash, and the Jawbreaker's drive section simply ceased to exist, its running lights winking out as it began a slow, powerless drift. On the bridge of the Midas, there was a collective, stunned silence. The crew, braced for a bone-jarring impact, slowly straightened up. They stared at the view screen, at the intact golden hull, at the drifting, crippled Vok escort. The silence was broken by a choked, triumphant whisper. Oh, my stars and atoms. Dr. Carter breathed, his eyes wide with rapture. He pushed himself off the console and stumbled toward the main science station, his face alight with fierce, unholy glee of a scientist who had just seen his life's work vindicated in the most spectacular way possible. He slammed his hand down on the console, bringing up a diagnostic display. It was a sea of green. Perfect energy dispersion. The lattice is flawless. Inertial dampening fields are holding at 100%. He spun around to face Ito, his voice rising with manic excitement, unable to contain himself. Do you see, Commander? You see? It's not just gold plating. That is what they don't understand. He gestured wildly at the screen. It is a molecularly synthesized aurum lattice, bonded to a substrate packed with microscopic field generators. The code is not just for show. It is the most perfect conductor that we can manufacture on this scale. When their most pathetic energy weapons hit, the lattice shunts the energy across the entire surface area of the ship in nanoseconds. He took a deep breath, his words tumbling over each other. The field generators react to that energy spike by entering a state of hyperexcitation. They lock the gold's atomic structure at the point of impact into a super-dense, perfectly symmetrical state. It becomes, for a fraction of a second, the hardest substance in the known universe. The higher the energy of the impact, the harder the plating becomes. And the inertial dampeners, oh, the dampeners! They project a localized field that neutralizes the kinetic force. The thrum that we felt, it was not an impact, but it was the field negating the force. He was practically vibrating with joy. He jabbed a finger toward the view of the Vok fleet. Any conductive material would work in theory. Copper, silver, but nothing matches gold's combination of supreme conductivity and atomic stability under extreme field excitation. The ancients, they thought it was divine for its incorruptibility, but it turns out they were just a few millennia and a hyper-field generator away from being right. Ito stared, first at Carter's ecstatic, near-lunatic expression, then at the view screen showing their pristine, gleaming ship. A slow, incredulous smile began to dawn on his face. My God, Ben, he said softly. It actually works. Works? Works? Carter scoffed, a joyous, wild look in his eyes. Commander, it sings! Aboard the bone grinder, the chaos had frozen into a state of stunned, horrified disbelief. Captain Kralg stood rigid, his mouthparts hanging slightly open. His 4 black eyes were fixed on his own tactical display, which was telling him a story so offensive to his entire worldview that he could not process it.
Status report! Status report!
He roared, the sound lacking its usual confident bombast. His weapons officer, a bulky Vok named Durg, swiveled his chair, his movement sluggish with shock.
Lord Captain, no damage. All shots fired. Report!
Kralg slammed a heavy, chitinous fist on a console, causing a shower of sparks.
0 energy penetration, Lord Captain.
Durg stammered.
Our plasma, it spread out and it vanished. Our kinetic slugs, our sensors show 0 momentum transfer. The human ship did not move. It just sat there.
The Vok science officer, a thinner, more stooped specimen named Jikt, spoke up. His voice a reedy whisper that barely cut through the hissing steam.
Lord Captain, my readings are illogical. They defy physics as we understand it.
Speak plainly, Jikt, or I will use your carapace to patch the hole!
Jikt flinched.
The impacts, sir. According to the energy feedback, the points of impact on the human hull, they did not weaken. They became momentarily stronger. We are detecting residual chronoton fields and localized energy density that it is theoretically impossible. It is as if their armor is feeding on our weapons.
The mockery that had filled the Valk bridge moments before had evaporated. It was replaced by a thick, heavy silence, the kind that precedes a paradigm shift. The human ship was not just a gaudy trinket, it was an abomination, a golden lie that somehow was telling a terrifying truth. The universe, as Krelg understood it, was beginning to crack at the seams.
Analysis of the ricochet that struck the jawbreaker,
Captain Reed said, her voice cutting cleanly through the lingering awe on the Midas Bridge. A few keystrokes from Ensign Davies brought up the data on a secondary screen. It showed the trajectory of the tumbling slug and a detailed breakdown of the damage to the Valk escort.
Minimal shielding. Non-existent point defense in the aft quarter.
Ito noted, his professional demeanor snapping back into place. The wonder still laid in his eyes, but his voice was pure officer on the deck.
They have no equivalent defense. They rely on thick hulls in overwhelming their opponent before they get hit in a weak spot.
They believe armor is for the front,
Reed said with a nod.
A cultural failing. It's honest, I suppose. And stupid.
She turned her head slightly, addressing the tactical station.
Ensign Davies, I want to send a message.
Aye, Captain. Target the main plasma cannon on Captain Krog's ship, the Bone Grinder. Don't target the bridge. Don't target their engines. Target their primary weapon.
Ito's eyebrows shot up. A disarmament shot. A demonstration.
Weapons officer. 1 shot. Make it count.
Target locked, Captain, came the calm reply. Main dorsal plasma cannon on the Valk flagship.
Fire.
The Midas did not shudder. It did not roar. A section of the golden hole in its dorsal spine slid back with a silent, fluid motion, revealing a weapon lens that glowed with a fierce blue-white light. There was a low hum that lasted for less than a second, and then a single, elegant, incredibly cohesive beam of energy lanced out across the 5,000 kilometers of space. It was a scalpel of pure energy, not a messy glob like the Valk plasma. It struck the Bone Grinder's enormous, over-engineered primary cannon, a weapon that took up nearly a third of its forward hull. There was a silent, brilliant flash. When it cleared, the entire weapon emplacement, the barrel, the powder conduits, the armor housing, was simply gone. Vaporized. The hull around this new gaping hole was blackened and melted. But the rest of the ship, from the bridge to the engine block, was untouched. It was a statement. It said, "We can touch you wherever we want, wherever we want, and you can't do a single thing about it." It was a demonstration of overwhelming and terrifying superiority. Aboard the Bone Grinder, the targeted strike was the final blow to Krog's comprehension. The impossible physics that he could dismiss as a sensor ghost. The ricochet that crippled his escort could be a fluke. But this was an intentional, deliberate, and mocking act of power. The fear and confusion on his bridge coalesced, superheated by the sheer humiliation of the act, and galvanized into pure ideological rage. He dismissed it as trickery, a deception beyond physics. A sophisticated shield that absorbed a certain amount of energy before failing. It had to be. The universe was built on honest mass and brute force. No amount of golden trickery could change that fundamental truth. The humans had a finite capacity, a limited defense. It could be overwhelmed. It must be overwhelmed.
They mock us!
Krelg roared, his voice shaking with a fury that bordered on religious fanaticism.
They think their parlor tricks can defeat honest power! They hide behind their shimmering lies! But we will show them the truth of the dark. The truth is force. The truth is volume. The truth is overwhelming power.
He turned to his command crew, his 4 eyes burning with zealous fire.
All ships, concentrate all fire on the lead human vessel. Every gun, every cannon, do not stop! Do not relent! We will saturate their pathetic shield. We will crack their shell and feast on the soft meat within. Break them with pure power!
His order, bellowed across the fleet-wide comm, was a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the confused Vok raiding party. Their captain's unshakable conviction washed away their fear. It was right. It had to be a trick. And the answer to any trick was always more force. The remaining 4 Vok warships, including the wounded Bone Grinder, turned their full attention to the lone golden ship. A moment later, the dark between them erupted. It was no longer a volley. It was a continuous, furious, unrelenting storm of plasma and kinetic slugs. The space around the Midas became a torrent of destructive energy, a solid wall of fire and force converging on a single point. The golden ship was engulfed, disappearing from view inside a sun-bright sphere of pure, weaponized hate. The deck of the Midas was humming now, a constant, low-frequency vibration that was beginning to set Ito's teeth on edge. The air itself felt thick, charged with energy. On the bridge, amber alerts had given way to flashing yellow warnings. "Captain!" Dr. Carter's voice cut through the low thrum. His earlier excitement was gone, replaced by sharp, focused urgency that an engineer watching his beautiful, perfect machine being pushed past its limits would have. He was staring at the energy dispersal diagnostic, his face pale. "The dispersal network is saturated," he called out, his voice tight. "The primary lattice is holding the impacts, but we're absorbing more energy than the secondary conduits can safely vent as passive heat. The system was designed for volley fire, not a continuous, concentrated barrage like this. Thermal bleed is climbing past projected limits." A new window popped up on the main screen, showing a schematic of the ship. Veins of angry red were spreading through the network of secondary conduits. "Hull temperature is rising, Captain," Ito confirmed, reading from his own console. "We're starting to cook from the inside out." Carter ran a frantic hand through his already messy hair. "He's right. The heat sinks are glowing. We'll have cascading overloads in the field generator network in 90 seconds, maybe less. The system will fail, and all that stored energy will flash boil the hull, us included." For the first time, a sliver of genuine peril pierced the calm of the bridge. They were invincible, but they were also a bomb. Their own perfect defense was about to become their funeral pyre. Captain Reed processed the information in the space of a single heartbeat. 90 seconds. Overload. Annihilation. She looked at the main view screen, which now only showed the raging, white-hot storm engulfing them. On the tactical display, the red icons of the Vok ships were pressing closer, tightening the net, pouring on the power. They thought they were winning. They thought their honest, brutal force was finally cracking the lie. But a strange, sharp smile touched Reed's lips. It was the smile of a predator who had just seen its prey walk willingly into the final, most deadly part of the trap. She turned her chair to face Carter. "Ben, that's stored energy. It's still in the primary lattice, isn't it?" "Contained, but present." Carter looked up from his console, his eyes wide. "Yes, a colossal amount of energy. The entire output of their fleet for the last 30 seconds. "Can you vent it out directly?" Reed asked, her voice dangerously calm. "As a pulse, outward, instead of passive heat." Carter's mind raced, catching her logic instantly. The engineer's panic was replaced by a scientist's thrill at a new, terrifying possibility.
Theoretically, it's a fail-safe that we never tested. The sunburst protocol. We can pulse the stored energy outwards from the primary lattice, but Captain, the containment field is what keeps that energy from frying our own systems. To create the pulse aperture, we would have to drop the containment field's integrity to 5% for 0.8 seconds. And for that fraction of a second, while the aperture forms, we will be vulnerable. If they hit us in that exact window, then...
They won't, Reed said with absolute certainty. She looked at the tactical plot again. The initial flare will be omnidirectional. Ben, a flashbang to blind every sensor they have. But the main pulse must be a direct release. Focus it outward, 180 degrees. I want all that energy concentrated on the ships doing the most damage.
A directed pulse yet?
Carter nodded frantically, his fingers already moving across his console, keying in the override sequence from the primary dispersal grid.
Yes, that's much more efficient. Preparing the sunburst protocol. This is either going to be very brilliant or very, very messy.
Helm, Reed commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Bring our prow to bear on that central cluster of 3 ships. Bring us in nice and close.
Aye, Captain,
the helmsman replied. Mr. Ito, Reed said, her eyes locked on the tactical display. The moment that pulse is away, the Vok fleet will be disoriented, and I suspect significantly damaged. I want our conventional batteries to provide the percussion, a cold, final rhythm to end this. Ito's grim expression hardened into a wolfish grin.
With pleasure, Captain. All batteries standing by.
The Midas began to turn. A slow, graceful, and utterly defiant movement. It moved deeper into the storm, its prow aligning with the 3 Vok ships at the heart of the assault. As it turned, the golden hull, already shimmering with the tracery of deflected energy, began to glow with a ferocious internal light. The thrumming from the impacts was building now, a rising, terrible tone. The ship was no longer reflecting the attack. It was containing it, pregnant with a stolen power. It looked like a small, captive sun. Reed watched the chronometer on her display count down. The Vok ships were now less than 2,000 kilometers away, still pouring on the fire. The yellow warnings in the bridge turned to a screaming solid red.
Containment failure in 10 seconds, Captain,
Carter shouted. Reed leaned forward, her hand gripping her armrest. Her voice, when she spoke, was as clear and calm as a winter morning.
Now, Mr. Carter. Vent.
Carter slammed his palm down on the console. For an infinitesimal moment, nothing happened. Then, an instantaneous, blinding flash of pure white light erupted from the Midas. It was not a beam or a bolt. It was an omnidirectional burst. A single, perfect sphere of multispectrum energy designed for one purpose: to overload every optical and energy sensor watching. On the bridge of the Bone Grinder, every screen went white. Alarms shrieked as sensors fried. Vok crewmen cried out, shielding their eyes. For a terrifying, heart-stopping fraction of a second, 0.8 seconds to be exact, the Golden Ship was exposed, its containment field at a mere 5%. It was the moment of ultimate vulnerability, but the Vok were blind. And then the main pulse followed. There was no sound. It was an event beyond sound. A silent, breathtaking wave of pure golden energy. The sum total of the Vok's futile, furious assault burst forth from the Midas in a perfect 180-degree arc. It was a release more than an explosion, a tidal wave of incandescent power, the color of a billion sunsets washing out from the ship's prow. It was the Vok's own rage, their own belief in brute force, captured, refined, and thrown back in their faces. It was the most beautiful and the most devastating thing that any of them had ever seen. The Golden Wave was not technically a weapon. It carried no kinetic force. It was a tidal wave of pure electromagnetic force and raw thermal energy. But for the 3 Vox ships caught in its direct path, the distinction was academic. Their sensors were already fried. Their shields, designed to stop kinetic slugs and focused plasma, were utterly unprepared for a wave of ambient energy on this scale. The wave washed over them. The Vox, honest, dense alloy, designed for brute force resistance, proved to be tragically an excellent conductor for the wave of thermal energy. The very density they prized became their undoing, absorbing the heat so efficiently that their ships cooked themselves from the outside in. Their systems died. Every conduit, every power relay, every computer core was flash-fused into a slag. Their unshielded hulls flash-boiled, causing catastrophic structural failures. Armor plates peeled away like burnt paint. Hulls warped and buckled. The ships, moments before the pinnacle of Vox aggression, began to drift, powerless and broken, their internal structures glowing a dull cherry red in the silent dark. The Vox attack, which had been a symphony of focused violence, broke into a cacophony of chaos and terror. The 4th ship, further from the pulse, was badly damaged but not dead. Its systems flickered, its crew blinded and panicked, its weapons silent. Krog tore his hands away from his seared eyes, blinking away the blinding white spots. His bridge was a disaster zone. Alarms blared a song of total system failure. The main view screen was dead. Emergency red lights cast long, dancing shadows across the panicked faces of his crew.
Report!
He bellowed, his voice raw.
Sensors are gone. All of them.
Durg shouted back.
Comms are out. I can't raise the fleet. Visual!
Krell commanded, stumbling toward the forward viewport, a thick pane of reinforced crystal reserved for dire emergencies. He peered out into the dark. He saw the Midas, its golden hull no longer glowing, sitting pristine and untouched in the darkness. And he saw his fleet, the Headcracker, the Spine Snapper, the Flesh Ripper. 3 of his best ships, adrift and glowing like embers, visibly twisting and breaking apart in the silence. The 4th, the Kneebreaker, was tumbling, venting plasma from a dozen fresh wounds. His attack force was crippled, shattered, annihilated by their own reflected power. The lie was true. The universe he knew was a fiction. As he stared in horror, a single channel, somehow punching through the electronic chaos, opened on a small, flickering emergency monitor. It was Captain Evelyn Reed. Her face was calm, but her pale gray eyes were chips of ice. The cool, quiet hum of her bridge was an insult to the screaming pandemonium of his own.
"You wanted our gold, Captain Krelg,"
she said, her voice echoing in the dying chamber of the Bone Grinder's bridge.
"By all means, have it."
She gave a small, sharp nod to someone off-screen. On the view screen of the Midas, Ito watched the enemy fleet drift, broken and helpless. He felt a surge of cold, fierce satisfaction.
Captain, they are dead in the water.
"Not yet, they're not,"
Reed replied, her voice devoid of heat.
"Mr. Ito, begin the finale."
Ito straightened in his chair, his voice ringing out with grim purpose.
All batteries. Target enemy vessels. Sequential fire. Target engines and primary weapon systems. Disable. Do not destroy. Let them drift home and tell the story.
The railguns began to speak, a staccato rhythm of magnetic fury. The missile launchers added their own deeper punctuation. The gunners of the Midas, guided by a flawless tactical network, went to work with cold purpose. Railgun slugs, fired with cold calculation, tore through the engine blocks of the crippled Vox ships. Missiles streaked out and neatly erased any remaining functional weapon emplacements. Within 5 minutes, the entire enemy force was completely neutralized. They were nothing more than a flotilla of drifting metal coffins, Their crews alive, but trapped. Their warrior pride shattered and left to cool in the dark. Reed watched the last real gunshot impact, then turned to her comms officer.
Ensign, prepare a single encrypted data burst. Destination, VOC Sector Command, primary frequency. What's the message, Captain?
The complete, unedited gun camera recordings from this engagement, Reed said. She paused for a beat.
And a text attachment. 4 words.
The ensign typed, then looked up, a ghost of a smile on her lips.
Message sent, Captain. Come and get your trash.
The bridge of the TCS Midas was quiet again. The symphony of calm control had returned. The alerts were gone. The lighting was its placid, cool blue. Outside the view screen, the field of ruined VOC ships floated silently. A modern art installation on the themes of hubris and failure. The golden hull of the Midas gave off a soft, warm afterglow. The last vestiges of the storm it had so effortlessly absorbed and returned. Commander Kenji Ito leaned back in his chair, the professional tension finally draining from his shoulders. He looked at the view, then at his captain, and a slow, wide smile spread across his face. He shook his head in quiet disbelief. Dr. Ben Carter was already on his feet, pacing excitedly and dictating technical notes into his personal datapad.
Lattice resonant cascade resulted in 99.97% energy return, right? So thermal venting efficiency exceeded maximum projections by a factor of 3. Minor fluctuations in the tertiary dampening field were within acceptable parameters, but we can refine the algorithm and... this is glorious.
Captain Evelyn Reed picked up the cup of coffee that had sat, forgotten, on her console for the entire engagement. It was cold. She took a sip anyway, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, were not on the wreckage before them. They were on the main star chart projected in the center of the bridge, on a single blinking rune deep within what was, until today, considered untouchable VOC territory. For the first time since the ambush began, she allowed herself a small, sharp, triumphant smile. It was a smile that promised new eras and old scores settled.
Mr. Ito,
she said, and her voice, now ringing with a quiet, unshakable finality, cut through the silence.
Set course for the rendezvous point. The rest of the Golden Fleet is waiting.
Commander Ito watched the last of the targeting icons vanish from his board and finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked out at the silent, drifting hulks of the VOC fleet, their honest and truthful designs torn open and cauterized. Krog had been right about one thing. The universe did demand truth. But the VOC, in their brutish simplicity, had mistaken the first, loudest truth for the only one. They saw the truth of the hammer, the rock, the blunt impact. They couldn't conceive of the other, sharper truths humanity had mastered. The truth of the lever, the lens, and the resonant frequency. The truth that the most elegant solution was often the most devastating. That was the human genius, Ito realized, staring at the golden curve of his own ship's hull reflected in the corner of the view screen. It wasn't just our technology, it was our philosophy. Other races found a principle and they declared it absolute. The VOC had strength, the Cathar had logic, the Silisk had collective consciousness. They were monolithic. But humanity was a glorious, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable paradox. We were the species that could compose a heartbreaking sonata and then use the precise mathematical principles of that music to calibrate a weapon of planetary devastation. We were scientists and poets, madmen and saints, all at once, often in the same person. Our frivolity was a testing ground for innovation. Our art was a crucible for new physics. We looked at the legend of a foolish king cursed by his own greed, and we didn't see it as a cautionary tale. We saw a challenge. We saw a blueprint for the most advanced defensive system in the galaxy, and we weaponized a myth. We plated a warship in gold not because we were decadent or soft, but because we were the only species mad enough to make our most beautiful creation our most lethal one. And that, my friends, was a truth the galaxy was only just beginning to learn.